Morgan, Friday, and here we are again. How's it going?
Happy Friday, Nick. It's going great. I am thrilled to be here this morning and a lovely
Would would you
late
say if you
summer.
weren't?
Yeah, some Friday morning, just be like, oh God, I hate being here with you. I don't. I don't think that's ever been true. Actually, I don't believe I've ever had a morning where I didn't want to be here. So
I
it's awesome.
appreciate that because I love our conversation.
Oh, me too. I love these Friday Power Hours. Hi, everyone who's joining this morning. If you're here, drop a hi in chat. We'd love to say a hi back to you. Thanks for coming,
and
Nick.
and our ongoing tradition is the question of the day,
Question of the day.
which I honestly didn't think about. I just
I
realized.
I do have a softball.
Okay, let's hear it.
Question of the day, and this is a way to warm up chat. So we want to hear from you too. So drop this answer in the chat. Wine or beer?
Oh,
Now,
why did you go there? That's a
last night I had some friends over. We had some wine. I know Nick's a big beer guy, but if you're somebody who, like many of my friends, are not into alcohol or don't drink, then I'd love to know what your favorite alternative is. Or, water's acceptable, but like, what other things are you consuming? So, Nick, wine or beer?
I will say I used to think that wine could pair better than beer. When I started to learn more about beer, I realized that beer actually pairs better than wine. And so I
Ah,
would go beer, hands down.
beer indeed. I am for many years I would say I was more of a beer guy, but in recent years maybe I'd say I'm more on the wine train. Um, but I don't know. It's kind of hard. I'm actually a whiskey guy. I mean, so I set myself up for failure on this question.
I like whiskey too, but
Yeah.
really, then if you like whiskey, you like beer because making beer is the first part of making whiskey. So you set yourself up on the
You're
right
trying to
track.
finagle me into this answer, aren't
It's just
you? The malt. We have to use the malt. The malt is the answer, huh?
you just got to
uh,
not drink it before you distill it. That's
right.
the struggle is real.
That's the struggle, honestly. I love all the answers we're seeing in chat. Some wine lovers, some beer lovers. I'm digging it. Thanks everyone for being here. Jeffrey, coffee throughout the day for me. What a great alternative. um, Today, Nick, you and I are diving deep both into some stories from our experience and talking about how to win the sale before you call, which sounds like a crazy idea. So, what's on your mind, Nick, when you think about winning the sale before you call?
So I have an unfortunate story for you guys.
Okay.
When I first started in sales, I actually wanted to be a lawyer. That was what I loved. I actually loved to argue, especially when I knew I was right. And so when I was on the phone, it was my opportunity to be the smartest person in the room, and I never let that down. And I would push, I would ask questions, I would try to navigate that conversation to go where I wanted to go. And to me, it was a fun fight. Well, one time I was doing my calls and I was, 80, 90 calls in, and I get this executive and I am telling him how to run his business and that what he's doing is not, and I'm going a little extra, but I was being pretty blunt and I was moving fast because I was prospecting. And he shut me down so hard that it has stuck with me 10 years later. And he said, Nick, this is the worst cold call I've ever had because you're asking questions that you should already know the answers to. Be better.
Whoa.
And very well respected in the industry, really great person. And then he said, can I get real with you? Can I just give you some advice? I'm like, okay. He's like, when I'm making major decisions, it's everything in my business is an investment. And I only ever have one or two top investments. And if you're not one of them, we shouldn't be talking.
Hmm.
So how could you be those one or two investments? How would you get in there? Who would you talk to? Who are those 2 people, 3 people, 10 people you need to talk to in my business to figure out what those are? How do they line up? Are you trying to go and avoid a pain? Are you trying to go and get me to a bigger goal? Where are you taking me? And turn it into a story.
I know it's rough to get a response like that from a prospect, but as Chris dropped in chat, I would have loved if someone told me that. I like the bluntness is hard, I'm sure, to deal with, but I imagine that opened your eyes to a different way.
I needed to hear it because I
Mhm.
assumed that sales was about moving fast and hitting numbers. Done. That was it.
And so many people are incentivized to do that right now.
And people wait to discovery to actually see if there's a reason to be talking. And I think this is the new age of prospecting is really I can win a deal before I start a deal because no and I'm just saying this because I do my research. I find those one or two investments. And if I'm not on that list, I will delay it because the why change, why now are not there. And that's okay. I would rather, open a deal, make sure they know who I am and that I'm a safe person to talk to, that I can be respectful. One thing that the other gentleman also told me is there's power in telling people the truth. And I'm like, what do
Hmm.
you mean? He's like, if you're not in my top two, or if you see that what you're doing is actually more expensive than just staying the same, and you tell me that, I will never forget. And so this sales is just conversations, but it's really about that value that you bring in that conversation. And really, what he was pointing to is you need to have hypothesis. You need to have a point of view coming into the business that takes me somewhere that I just never put the two, connected the dots. And when you do that, now you have my attention. You may not have won the sale, but you won the first battle, and that is getting my attention. And I
Hmm.
think that's what we're going to be really diving into today is
Hmm.
how to get the key people's attention to be that top priority, or how to go and keep that relationship back off until you are that top priority and keep those communication channels open.
When I was in it, this reminds me of a story. When I was in the agency world, I led a business development campaign for the agency that I was helping run, and we did. It was a great. I mean, as marketers, we like to be ridiculous. So it was a fun, disruptive campaign, and we were sending stuff, and it generated some conversations, which is what we wanted. And we got into one conversation with this client, Nick, and what I realized was that we could have learned everything we needed to know about this client before we had a discussion with them. And what it felt like from their experience, because I just asked afterwards, one of the stakeholders, and she was very kind and very blunt. And basically, it was like, yeah, I kind of felt like you guys were wasting our time. Like it felt like any other engagement that we have with an external partner who's prospecting us. And uh, honestly, a lot of the questions that you guys ask, we publish, and you could have done your homework and like found out those things before you got on a call with us to ask us those things. And first of all, immediately I was like, oh shit, well, we definitely lost this one. We're not going to work with this company, and that happens, right? But it was this key lesson that I used from an agency world when I started to freelance, which was what can I learn about this company in order to impress them almost? And I remember that after that conversation with this one client, or well, prospect, sorry, uh, I dedicated myself to try and do more and more upfront work as long as the juice was worth the squeeze, as long as like the deal was big enough and it was worth my time, that I was going to learn the things I needed to know about this account before I went and talked to them. Because when I was working for myself and I was freelancing, I realized that I needed to know those things because in freelance world, you're a commodity. And the ways to stand out and above the rest is not because I had a better portfolio or a better product or I had a better offer. Ultimately, it's like 80% the same. It was that I knew more about the account. I knew more about their problems. and I knew how I could insert myself into that flow.
And I'm sure that people are listening, like what Morgan just went through, there's that evolution. And so what, good, better, best,
Hmm.
what does it sound like when it changes? And
Hmm.
so I was talking to a VP of sales, and so I did my outreach, and he didn't get back to me right away. It took a little while, but he gets back to me, and all he writes back is, "How in the hell do you know that? Can we book a meeting?"
Hmm.
And so we start talking. And he said, "I just need to know how you knew what you knew to start that conversation. Like, what tools are you using?" And I was like, "Well, I just use SalesNav. And I saw that you guys just did a major hiring spree, but you didn't hire any managers yet. So one of the things I've seen when that happens is that retention falls off within 6 months, or you miss pipeline goals, or depending on if you're funded, then VCs will say, well, you got to go and right size."
Hmm.
And we end up just spending the whole conversation talking about triggers and targeting, and that conversation is still going because what we talked about first was the industry. It doesn't matter what size of deal you're targeting, you need to know your industry better than anyone else. Hard stop.
Yep.
When accounts are big enough, so over 10,000, then you need to know the account. When you have an even bigger deals, like 50,000 plus, then it really comes down to the person and understanding the workflow.
Or the committee.
Or the committee, right? But what you're
Hmm.
doing is you're doing this. You either do it all up front, so you're spending a week doing all this research before you start your campaign because you're doing a commodity sale and it's too small to go and spend the time on each one, but you still need to understand themes. I bet you if you go back through your CRM, even if you're selling something under 10,000 and you go through and look at what you've won in the past 3 years, there'll only be 2, maybe 3 reasons why they bought. And if you don't know those, you are trying to win on the phone and you're at a huge disadvantage. So, this whole how to win before you call is how to prep yourself to know just enough to be dangerous to go and have a really smart conversation and have them saying, "Yeah, actually, we were just talking about that in this morning's meeting. Yeah, I'd love to talk about that."
Hmm. And to sort of dive into this more, the tiering that Nick laid out is something we've been working on in our our own work and with the companies we work with, which is that at a foundational level, if you're prospecting, you have to build industry context. No matter how big or small your deal is, you got to know your industry. And the way I think about this is to know your industry, you have to know your product and what you offer and what problems it solves in relationship to the industry, right? You have to know your competition, what products they offer, and what problems they solve. And then lastly, you have to know why you're different than your competition inside of your industry. And most crucially, how you can articulate that. Now, the articulation piece is what a lot of sellers spend a lot of time on is they get to the personalization and relevance and they think that's where the money is made. Oh, I saw you went to the university. If some I got this, I saw you went to the University of Denver. Go Pios. Hey, do you need SDR help? Like that's okay. That's not going to be a winning message, first of all. And second, it has I, as the buyer, am thinking about my industry and your competition, not necessarily the specifics of your personalization. So, starting with a better understanding of you and your product in relationship to your competitors and their products in the eyes of your buyers is where this starts. Building that context, understanding how the puzzle pieces fit together and how the industry comes together, literally who's doing what, how is it all oriented, is where your prospecting research begins. Because if you can't get on a phone, and this is actually something I learned from Nick, and this floats around every once in a while, but I know, dangerous. But if somebody brings up on a call or in an email and says, look, honestly, yeah, we've actually been looking at competitor A, and you can't say, man, that is awesome. I'm so excited that you chose them. They're great for companies looking for this kind of solution. But for companies looking for another kind of solution, we tend to find that competitor A doesn't fit the bill. So you can articulate to your prospect why they're a good choice and also why they're a bad choice.
It a lot of this it seems so counterintuitive, but think about it. When you look at your list in front of you, and I remember doing this for years, as they, marketing would give you a list, or, now enablement's giving you a list.
Mm-hmm.
And you have this list of 1,000 accounts, 500 accounts, 100 accounts. Do you actually know why they're on the list? If you don't, which I never did, you're at a huge disadvantage because you don't understand the context of them being there. Oh, you're B2B tech in North America? So what? But this is where you got to go when you're answering this. Think of it from the buyer's perspective. So I'll give you an example for sales. So please chime in the comments if I nail this or if I'm completely off. After talking to thousands of salespeople from the ground floor up to leadership, there's only two things that regularly come up in conversation. Any guesses, Morgan? Number one? I'll give you number two if you can get number one.
Why deals can't close fast?
You're really close.
Okay.
So that's number two, but I'll bring you back to number one. We'll circle back
Okay.
in a second. Okay.
Okay.
I can't get enough pipeline.
Of
Number one
course.
is I can't get first meetings. I can't get enough pipeline. My prospecting isn't working. I don't know how to prospect. I don't know who to call. Pipeline's the main issue.
Mm-hmm.
Number two is very close to what you said. It's not just closing fast. Is we have these deals in pipeline, but we can't close them.
Close them, period. Of course. Mm-hmm.
What do you guys think?
Does that
that
resonate?
dead on for
Mm-hmm.
sales? Because it's pretty much just been those two things, but it's just said differently. And so when you understand the themes, you can have any conversation. But this is an earned, kind of like call it earned wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
This is why some sellers that are really, really good, you don't see them do as much research because they have a pattern in their head, a routine that they'll glance at a quick LinkedIn profile or they'll go do a quick Google search and they're like, okay, I didn't see this. I did see this. Didn't see that. And it's like a computer because it's like going for a run. When you've run the same path for so long and you see different markers, you know how far it is. You mentally know how you felt. Were you gassed? Did you still have energy in the tank? How fast were you going? Oh, cool. I'm going way faster than before. So you're proud. They know this because of routine and repetition. So it looks like they're not doing research, but they've done the hard work. They've won and they're carrying that knowledge forward.
Can I actually mirror this from the buyer's perspective?
Please.
So for a number of years, I used to commute. A pretty long commute, actually. It was like 30 to 35 minutes in a car, and that was mostly distance. It wasn't traffic. It was a long commute, both ways. And the first couple of weeks of driving the commute, I was very attentive. I was like, okay, yeah. And then after a month or two in, I could just drive it on autopilot. Like I didn't have to think about where I was going. My brain already had mapped it all out. Yeah, sure, I was paying attention. But as we all know, when you drive the same route over and over again, your brain sort of just eases into autopilot mode and you just drive it. In sales, that would be called a mental spam filter. So from the buyer's perspective, if they've heard a message before and it turns out that that message was not a right fit, and then they heard a second message that kind of sounded the same, and it turns out that they're not right fit, then the third, fourth, fifth, 20th, 50th time that hits their inbox, their little mental spam filter goes, nope, I'm not even going to respond. Because what? They're on autopilot. They've already driven this commute before. So as much as sellers, we develop the patterns and habits of recognition, our own mental model about what buyers need. Buyers are simultaneously developing their own spam filters that prevent you from getting in there if you sound like everybody else. And most often what happens is you sound like everybody else if you don't have the industry context for a small deal, a account context for a medium-sized deal, or a persona based context for a large deal?
Mm-hmm. Wasim had a
Oh,
great
yes.
question. I'll bring that up. Fanatical prospecting, combo prospecting, how to book a meeting with anyone. Three really great books. Justin Michaels' Tech Powered Sales, really good because he goes over a lot of the different methodologies in the one book.
Hmm.
Challenger sale and or actually I think challenger customer for most people would actually be a better read because we live in a social world. But now,
Pull up Wasim's question.
hmm,
He asked, how do you handle a person who tells you, for example, we just signed with XYZ and we're tied in a contract with a penalty?
ooh, great question. So guys, as you guys know, this is your show. Like Wasim did, throw any questions you have in the comments and we will
Hmm.
make sure they get answered. And this is a great one.
Hmm.
So, what do you do? Well, if you did what Morgan said earlier and you really know your market, know the industry, know your competitors, you know where you stand out, or if you don't.
Hmm.
And you're like, that is so good. Like, it kind of like what Morgan had said, like, I give them a compliment. That's great. Like, obviously, you believe in this and you made a really good choice. a lot of our a lot of our customers actually use them, but they bolt us on as well to go and cover this. So then they actually work together
Hmm. Multiply instead of rip and replace.
and just leave it. See
Hmm.
what they say. What do you think about that?
Hmm.
Have you ever tried going and doing this and this? Like give them a comparison so they're thinking about their workflow and how it'll change or if it won't. Because what happens with a lot of technology is like video prospecting. People will get video prospecting. It's exciting for 2 weeks, but then they don't incorporate it into their workflow because it's extra effort. And then it's done, even though it is super effective.
Hmm. Adrian has a good question, and I want to address a framing thing on this. So, Adrian asks, any rebuttal when a prospect says they are already tied in and not looking to switch vendors? Any open ended questions, thoughts? So, let me just say this first, and then I'll let Nick actually carry this. What this question indicates to me is that the buyer is already commoditized what you have to offer. And in their mental model, based on your original approach, if you've gotten to the phone or you've gotten them to respond to an email and they're saying, look, we already have this other vendor and we're tied in or we're not looking to switch, the way that you conducted your outreach did not distinguish you and what you have to offer from your competitors. So in their mental spam filter, they immediately just categorize it to, oh, here's another vendor in this space. We already have a solution for that.
So, with this, a lot of the time when I get this type of response, it was when I was leading with a value prop and not an observation.
Hmm.
And so,
Say
what the
that again.
pros,
Hold on, hold on, hold on. Say that again.
you'd pick up the phone and you would lead with a value prop, or your email would be value prop driven. So basically, it's not your pitch, but it's pretty freaking close. And so what they're doing is what Morgan had just said is they have a mental spam filter that puts you into this box. Oh yeah, like Morgan's actually in this marketing box or social selling or branding or whatever box that your value prop means to them. What I found that changed this is when you lead with an observation and an insight. And so, what does it tell you about their company and their initiatives that they picked that company? What do you think they'd be solving? What would be their one or two top investments that they would be making this a priority? What do you think they might have missed? One of the most brilliant things that I've seen somebody do in a consultative sale recently was from Megan Mishak, and she actually has a slide that says what can go wrong.
Hmm. Mm.
That's great. There's two different ways you can go about this. You can go and give them insight on a fuller package or something that's gets them closer to their goal and get laser focused because of your industry knowledge, or you can flip it and say, "That's great. Could I let you know?" Or these are the 3 to 5 things that I see go wrong. Just something to go and consider as you guys are rolling this out. And if you need any help, feel free to shoot me a call.
Hmm.
I've gone through hundreds of these.
Hmm.
But what you're doing is now you're making them think, well, why didn't the seller go and tell me that this might be an issue? And what you're actually doing is you're infusing buying criteria at the last mile. Oh shit, we never actually thought about training for the people on the ground floor. Maybe this isn't like the most intuitive software. They know how to use one piece, but they don't know how it links with the CRM or maybe with how our email provider works. Oh shoot. So then it's going to take more time for them to go and do this. So we're actually not going to see value for 6 months to a year. So their promise of this promised land they're going to take us is actually further.
And I'll just add on to this, um, in that crafting that observation is something worth your time. And you don't have to template it, and it doesn't have to be the same for every account. But if you have industry context, it will be easier to articulate this observation based on a win-loss analysis in your CRM, knowing which accounts closed and why they did and what results they got. That way you can observe in their company. Let's say you're selling I don't know, an internal comms platform. Hey, I noticed that your comms internal communications director just turned over, and companies that also have turnover in these positions often feel overworked. And uh, this other company had this exact same experience that you're going through. Is that true? Look for
Could you
validation.
could you imagine? Hey, I noticed you don't ever respond to your email. What we've noticed is that it's usually an internal comms issue because you keep getting crap in your email that you have no
Such a
no
good
need to get.
observation. It's such a good observation.
We actually went and just implemented this. Interested in
Hmm.
discussing? Like it's about having fun, and I really want to go and tie it into what Paul just asked. I haven't read this book, Paul. What's your thoughts on selling from the heart? But I will tell you, one of the best things to do as a seller is to figure out who you are. I know it
Hmm.
sounds like a dating thing. You're like, well, within dating, I need to go and like find my true self. And it's like, as a seller, you got to put yourself in a box first and understand the process that drives everything. When you become really good is when you break the box in defining who you are and how you sell.
All great artists know which rules to break.
And so, what do you love? What are your hobbies? Who has those hobbies in that org that you're talking to? Sales is about casting nets. And so you also got to play it into who you are as a person to go and win those battles. So when we're talking about from the heart, empathy is something I'll never get replaced. No computer can go and do storytelling quite like what we can because of our ability to listen, interpret, get the context, and give a relevant story. So, stories, personality. Are you goofy? Are you super serious? Do you use GIFs in your messages? Are you multi threading, adding humor and like different insights outside of what they would expect? Like, are you throwing in jokes and like, Hat, we were just talking about this. See, you guys are right. You're not the only ones that are experiencing this, but it
Hmm.
really comes down to you and what is acceptable and what's not. And you need to lean in on that superpower from the heart of who you are. If you love sports, don't hide it.
Yeah.
If you hate selling, tell them that. Hey, I know
Yeah.
you're expecting all this like different sale. I don't do that because I don't like it.
Hmm.
I'd rather just have a conversation because I feel like it's more natural as a buyer when I experience that.
Hmm.
Use it as your superpower.
All right. I think a good prompt for us to transition is Aaron's question. What tools besides the basics are you guys using for research? This is as I would say, a banger of a question, because this helps us dive into something a little bit, something a little bit deeper. And the um, the reality is there's lots of ways to go about the research process. So there's what Nick has showcased before, and we do have previous episodes on this. Um, is there are ways to do this automated, and there are ways to do this manual, and it is often a mix of these that are the best research methods. So part of the automated stack is a mixture of LinkedIn Sales Navigator and Google Alerts for your industry. And the way I'm going to give like a brief overview. If you shoot me a DM, I will send you the full recording where we go through what we call dynamic prospecting. And uh, basically, you're creating an account list. Uh, you're adding accounts to that account list, and then you're watching for intent data. You're looking for leads that are looking at your profile. You're looking for um, people who are added to the account. You're looking at changes in the account. You're using sales nav data to understand the company better. And essentially, at this point, we're assuming you're selling something a little larger than 10 grand ACV. Then you're using Google Alerts to set up alerts for specific keywords or insights related to your industry changes, announcements, not just funding rounds, but other news pieces. And those things, once set up, can run on an automated fashion. So one, you're constantly building industry context, and two, you're also building knowledge about a specific account based on this sort of automated stack. The other side is some more manual work. And I would say that everybody, how do I articulate this? I think everybody has their own favorite flavor of ice cream. At the end of the day, it's all ice cream. But some people like Oreo chunks in theirs, and other people like a good caramel drizzle. And some folks just like a mint flavor. So you might go out and find 10, 20, 30, or as many different flavors of ice cream as in the world as there are ways to research and account manually. But I think the base ice cream sort of comes back to a few things. One, Nick's favorite questions: why now and why them? If you can't answer why you're reaching out to them now instead of 60 days from now, or now instead of 60 days ago, you don't have a strong case yet to reach out to them. And I'll say, like, job changes or funding rounds are not an answer for why now. There's got to be a pain associated with the answer to why now. So it's great that they raised money, but that money also means that they're going to encounter this problem that we help solve. That is a better answer to why now. And why them, being the person you're reaching out to or the account that you're reaching out to, is why this account specifically instead of other accounts on your list. And this comes back to your ability to prioritize your list. So you can answer those questions by using LinkedIn Sales Nav data and some of the dynamic prospecting from alerts. But then you can also deep dive and you can look at active accounts on LinkedIn, active personas on LinkedIn. What are they talking about and what are they sharing? You can look at industry case studies or reports. You can look at content on their website, PR, and newsroom releases. I can't speak English. And tons of different data that exists on their site. If they're a public company, you can even use public financials to help build your case to answer why now, why them. There's also ways to, I'm trying to think of, like, aside from the website, and then you can also look at the ways that that company's staff is interacting with other companies on LinkedIn. So you can kind of put the dots together. There's a lot of flavors of ice cream here, but eventually the base always comes back to why now, why them.
When I first started in insurance, we were 100% commission. Nobody paid for our trips. And unfortunately, we got service tickets, but the idiot that put the service tickets together had never seen a map of Alberta or our area, apparently, because they would send me to completely different areas that would be 6, sometimes 8, 10 hours apart driving.
Mhm.
And so they would get these tickets. And so think of it like your account list. But what you had to do is you had to go and route that trip to pay your bills. So before you left, who did you actually have to talk to in that week to pay for the trip? And who would get you into actually in the green making money?
Hmm.
And there was a kicker. If those sales didn't go, like if they canceled in the first 2 years, we had to pay our commission back. So why would they change? Why now? Where could I go to find that information? What would I need to know? What are those main drivers that are making them want to go and do something? Is it efficiency? Is it performance? Like they just want to go and make more money? Is it because they want to have better operations? Is it because they want to build their brand and build awareness? Is it because they're worried about risk? What are those key drivers? And where could I go? Well, back in the day, we didn't have the internet. So what we would do is we would read community newsletters. We would call front desks or call like economic development or the Chamber of Commerce. We'd immerse ourselves in the community. There was different things that we would do to get access to the information because it wasn't widely available. Sometimes it even meant that I had to stop in a library in the small community, or I had to find where the hubs are where people talk, whether it was a coffee shop or a pub or a golf course, and I had to go and mingle with people to get that information. So the answer isn't what tech, it's what information and what is the best place to find it.
That actually brings up an interesting point in the remote era. Slack communities are your friend. And maybe we'll do a deep dive on this in the future, Nick. But the amount of insight and research we have gained by simply engaging with people, our ICP audience, inside the many different Slack communities that exist in our industry, I think is extremely underrated for this phase of research because it's quick and it's personal. And as long as you're asking good questions and you're not pitching and it's a casual conversation and it's clear it's not just an interrogation and you're having a good conversation, you can learn a lot about your industry really quickly. So it's sort of a digital alternative or replacement for some of these, community newsletters and some other, can I say old school tactics? Is that offensive, Nick? I
No, that's what I call
no.
them,
Okay, okay. It's
or
great.
ineffective,
Or
whichever.
well, I
But every industry is a little different. Every persona is a little different. This is why I start with a sheet that I fill out, not why I lean on tech, because depending on who I'm selling to, this changes. Sometimes Twitter's really good. Sometimes LinkedIn's better. Other times it's Reddit. Other times it's Slack communities or Discord. Where you're gathering your information changes. The information you're gathering does not. And so think about this. If you had a list of 1,000 accounts, that was your total addressable market, you need to prioritize it because you don't have enough time in the day to work that list fully and properly. Maybe you use a sequencer. I would recommend not, but that's my own opinion because unless you're selling under 10,000, it just doesn't make as much sense.
Mhm.
Now, when you're going and doing this, I just lost my train of thought. Jesus.
Oh, I mean, I can jump in really quick, Nick.
I
You're
just
like,
heard the dog's getting into something.
oh, okay.
I'll
a
deal with it
little,
after.
a little puppy moment. I like
A
it.
little puppy moment. Yeah, she's here getting into the cupboard, so I'm hoping she's not
Oh.
eating something. But you have your TAM, like your full list. You have to prioritize it. But those are objects. People
Hmm.
they objectify their prospects by just keeping them as an object. Dynamic prospecting is when you lead with an event, with an
Hmm.
observation. So the cleanest and easiest way to go and shortlist is what changed. So a couple that I used to use were who just joined the Chamber of Commerce, who's hiring in the community, um, who just got office space, who. So what would I do? I would talk to realtors in the area. I talk to the Chamber of Commerce. I would look at who just got added to the sponsors to local events, who is investing for awareness. So I could find this before I actually left on my journey. So think about your product using SalesNav or Google, or you're searching. What are some events that really signal right now is the time to change? And think of it like a campaign. So when you're setting out on a Monday or however you're building your lists, you're pulling the new changes and adding that to your list. You're like, oh, just raised Series B. Maybe that's one. Or just, is hiring a sales enablement person.
Mm.
Have lists, but also write a definition of why it matters and what it's saying about the company and where they're going. That's your observation and tied with the insight. So now when you're reaching out, it's really easy to go and say, who should I call first? Because isn't that the hardest question is who do I call and what do I say?
Hmm.
Well, what do I say comes from why are you calling? But
Yep.
actually, and who
Uh-huh.
do I call first comes to who do you feel the most strongly about? Because there's certain like criteria that they met. Who do you know the most about their business? Who have you worked in their role, or do they have roles that you're familiar with? Like, just do a quick gut check if you're not sure. But it's
And
simple little things that drive this and make it an easy routine for every day.
mhm. And one thing that I've often thought about in prioritizing lists is there are likely at if you in a certain point in time, there's always going to be Princess Leia accounts. There will always be accounts who are in trouble right now and asking for help.
Help.
Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope. It is also going to be like 2 to 3% of your list. Like it's going to be a very small chunk. But if you can figure out the ways that they are articulating that, and maybe out on LinkedIn, maybe somebody's posting about it, or you see a newsroom release, or you see an event in their company, they just laid off a lot of people, or they just hired a lot of people. Depending upon the product that you sell, maybe one event is better than the other. Being able to figure out what are the small chunk of Princess Leia accounts that you know if you reached out, they'd listen. Great way to start. Then there's a larger chunk that Nick is pointing to beneath Princess Leia, which I don't have a neat analogy for. Maybe it's something like Indiana Jones. But basically, you have to take them on an adventure. They they're not they're not in trouble right now, but if they continued to do as they do, they would be in trouble maybe 6 months, maybe 12 months down the line, and you're coming in and saying, "Look, we've worked with other companies like yours in a similar sort of scenario, and we know 6 to 12 months down the line they're going to experience these things, and we help you prevent that or avoid that or solve for that." Worth a call? And that chunk is also based on events, but it's going to be less urgent events. And this is, sales is an art form. This is all art. As yes, we need science. We need the behavioral science. We need the social psychology that informs all of our outreach and our messaging and all, and our tone and our tactics. It's true. And it's also a bit of an art form here, figuring out what events through trial and error are actually the right sorts of accounts to prioritize. Because that way, you have a reason for reaching out. If you don't know what you're going to say when you pick up the phone, besides, we're a really special company, and I don't mean to be super glib here, but we're a really special company with a really special product. You have a lot of money, and you should buy from us. If that is essentially your message, you haven't gotten to that prioritization yet. You haven't had the observation or the insight, and you can't answer why now, why then.
Everything we've talked about today isn't about follow up and working accounts, it's just research. So I noticed that Wasim had actually mentioned like tier one, two, and three.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually a little bit different. Tier one, two, and three. So tier one could be strategic accounts over a certain dollar value, and you're
Mm-hmm.
doing more in depth research because the juice is worth the squeeze. We're kind of talking about more like a tier two
Mm-hmm.
and how you're pulling triggers so you're not spending as much time looking for information that it's gathering for you. And what it allows you to do is as you're doing outreach, you're getting smarter because you're like, oh, what did that VP of sales say? Oh, interesting. Why did they say that? Why? Or you book a meeting. Why did that work? What about that problem statement? What about that observation? You're reverse engineering and you're really challenging yourself about the process and the mindset. And it really defines like how much time you have to research by that dollar value, that A, B, and C. But
Mm-hmm.
we're not talking about prioritizing ongoing. When you're prioritizing ongoing, you always, it's almost like this would be the last piece.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's something just to go and like just touch on really quickly. How I used to organize my days is my top one was deals in pipeline. How was I moving? How did I make sure we kept momentum so things weren't dying? My second was we booked a meeting, but it wasn't, they weren't in pipeline yet.
Mm-hmm.
Right underneath that was contacted. We were in conversation, but before a meeting. And then before that was on my list.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how you follow up and how you would time block for those. So think about that. It could be a half an hour, it could be an hour. But think about it. If you limit yourself only to a half an hour, this is why you have to go and figure out your schedule bigger than week by week and day by day. With account research, is the juice worth the squeeze? Can you afford to do research every day? Or do you have to do it every month or every 2 months to go and do a very big, broad research on the industry and how you're going to go and pitch it and then just hit the ground running for 2 months?
Mm-hmm.
Or can you afford to do a little bit more deeper account research because you're selling between 10 and 50,000? But you have to ask yourselves these questions to get paid your worth so that you're spending enough time and you're preparing yourself for the calls before you actually call. And I'll tell you what, that's really interesting. In psychology, people won't tell you things, but if you guess and you're wrong, they love to correct you. So when you come in with a
So true.
hypothesis of like, hey, Morgan, it looks like, and they're like, actually, no, we're actually doing that. And they catch themselves after, like, oh, wow, like, but it's because you came with knowledge. You came with
Mhm.
an assumption, a unique point of view that came from your research. And you can do these with commodity sales when you're using triggers. And then you just run your triggers like campaigns. Justin Michaels has a really good piece in his book, Tech Powered Sales, called Liquid Syntax.
Hmm.
That is really good if you're selling under 10,000. And basically, it's triggers that set these rules. So if you just raised funding, just hired a VP of sales, just did this, send them this message. Something to consider is like give yourselves rules on how you send messaging and test if those rules are meaningful, if they actually lead to the right insight.
Hmm.
So this all goes back to the juice worth the squeeze because you got to really go back to what you're selling and is it worth doing it all as one or is it worth doing it on everyone?
Hmm. I think the last, not the last, but another thing that has come to mind is if you're a seller, and we hear this all the time, there's a lot of confusion, antsiness, nervousness about how to deal with specific things that are brought up in a call or as a response to an email. And oftentimes, not every time, but I would say probably at least 2/3 of the time, the reason that those things are popping up is because you haven't done your research in the first place. And so you've created a message or created an outreach that hits a mental spam filter. And so a problem arises and they bring that up to you. And then you're like, oh, I don't know. Because if you did your upfront research, a lot of those objections go away. In the fundraising world, I was just talking with a founder recently, and one of his mentors always said that investors if at the end of a pitch investors have questions about specific slides or specific pieces of your business case, your pitch isn't good enough. You have to work on that. And so it's not a one-to-one. In sales, it's an ongoing conversation. You're not just pitching for money. But if at the end people have additional questions about, oh, what do you mean when you said this? Or specific questions that are about what you had just said, it's an indication that you need to work on your messaging. Because if at the end of the message their response is, oh, like Nick, how did you know that? Or you have to tell me more. Yes, I'm super interested. That means you've nailed it. You just dead on. And that's what we're all shooting for. That's the goose and the golden egg, basically. But and it's okay if you're not there yet. Like, oh my God, you should look at our outreach sequences. Like, we try stuff and it falls flat, and that's okay. That's how we learn, right? And taking those learnings, then incorporating it, improving it, seeing how that does, is part of the process of getting better at prioritizing and getting better at outreach. So that when you call, when you email, when you do a DM or whatever, that outreach resonates really well and it generates a good conversation, not about what you said, but about what it would mean for them.
I have a challenge for everyone. This one really helped me, so I'm going to throw it out there for everyone. Can you write your discovery agenda before you prospect? So if you go look at any of the top sellers in your org, look at their agendas that they set for discovery. What were they looking for and how did they get those objectives on that list? Those homework assignments with the criteria, why are they there? And if you look at enough of them, you'll see themes that you can copy and paste. And so when you're prospecting, you're teasing through that list really fast of like what you're starting discovery and prospecting. But you can
Mhm.
even look for some of those things digitally and find them before you call. There's some things you won't. You have to make the call, you have to send the email, you have to do the LinkedIn outreach or whatever platform you're using. And I always look at disc like when you're starting your disco, what do you need to know to have a good conversation? You can tease that out in prospecting. And if you can write that full disco sheet, think of how that'll change your prospecting when you're going through because you're not interrogating, you're leading with educated assumption about their business.
Yes.
And then, like Wasim was saying earlier, then you just got to focus on tonality and delivering that message in a way that resonates.
Yes. 100%. Um, Nick, one of the last things that sort of comes up, and this definitely has to do with list prioritization, and I think it does come back to like, is the juice worth the squeeze? But how do you think about who to call or who to exactly reach out to? Because especially at an account of a certain size, there's going to be a few different personas that might hit your ICP, or a few different profiles that are the right people to talk to, or that maybe you eventually will have to talk to depending upon the size of your deal. So, how do you think through who to call first and as a part of your outreach?
I've been asked this so many times, and I've thought about it from so many different angles. And the one thing I always come back to that has actually worked is workflow.
Hmm.
What workflow am I going to affect with my solution? And who would get the call in the middle of the night if something went wrong? And what department is that? And
Interesting.
I would build a web of who would feel it the most and how it would resonate out. So think of it like, they have like they have the things about earthquakes, and they show like how it spreads out over.
Oh, the
And
little like graphs that jitter and
so
all
I
the radial thing. Hmm.
so I build out my account maps like that. Is how intense is the impact on the org, starting with a workflow that I affect. And so like for us right now, I might go in on a director of sales, but if I see that they have a really high push on content, I look to see if maybe they have a director of demand gen, or maybe even a sales enablement person, and I would look at the sales enablement person's background, and then I wouldn't just reach out to one. So it's looking at who has the highest. I think Ian Koniak said it best: is problem with pain. Who has the largest problem with the most frequent pain? That's where I start. And if I can't narrow it down without calling, then I start with the end users and I start
Mm.
doing my research. Because so, say if you're selling Martech, who in the marketing department specifically uses your product every day or would affect their workflow? What does their workflow look like right now? What processes do they have in place or not? And if you can't find that, going and looking at job descriptions, or just going through doing a quick Google search, go ask them.
Yeah.
And they don't get as much communication as executives, so they'll typically respond a lot faster than anyone else. But if you could draw it, like I can't remember what they call those things, but that's how I think about it, is like an earthquake and how it resonates out or
Mm.
radiates out. And that's how I draw it on my board. I have my whiteboard and I'll draw it out as my account map. And then I make a guess of what's in it for them, for each person. And then that's what leads my outreach: is why change, why now, and what's in it for them.
Hmm. Well, I just learned something.
I don't think I've ever talked about that with you before.
No, it's awesome. And it's such a good visual. It's funny as I think back even in my days doing like business development campaigns for the agency, like I think we share a mental model, even though I might articulate it differently. But I was always thinking about who actually uses the product, and then who actually is like needs to sign off, which isn't a one-to-one with what you just said, but the the idea of targeting somebody who in which there's the highest impact in their day to day with the highest pain with or problem with pain is a really great way to take an account and prioritize personas, especially for outreach.
I w- I was working for a company, and we were having really bad forecasting and pipeline issues. So they bought a CRM,
Hmm.
and it failed miserably. And then I worked at another company where we were just using Excel, and we were doing all our data entry in Excel, and we had shared. It was crazy. Whoever built that deserves like an award, because that was some like crazy, yeah.
Mhm.
But then they bought a CRM and everything got better. And so what was the difference? This is
Mm.
what made me start thinking about this. One had a process, one didn't. So one was trying to buy a solution that was going to fix it, but people didn't have a process day to day to use it. So
Interesting.
the implementation would be a lot harder. So if we can find people that are mentally ready, that we can find that workflow and we can understand how we fit in or don't, that has just been the easiest way for me to go and get into accounts and have those conversations.
Totally. Um, well, we're close to the end of the hour here. And I just have to say one last thing I think about in outreach. And I think we've learned this more from trial and error is that people have an uncanny ability to find your LinkedIn profile. And the reason is they search for it on Google. So, one thing to consider, and this is less true on phone calls. I know the title of this is about calls, but if you think about outreach in general, if you're sending cold emails, it has astounded me the number of VP of sales or VP level and C suite level people who take 3 seconds to look up the name of the person on LinkedIn or to even just Google search, see if your company has a page for you, or Google's great at indexing LinkedIn, so they might find your profile anyways. And then they're going to make a credibility check based on that profile. So, one thing to think about, which might seem counterintuitive if you're mostly on cold calls and cold emails, is making sure that the way you're representing your company and your product is aligned and that there's credibility from your LinkedIn profile. And I mean, not to juice this too hard, but tomorrow morning I'm sending out a field notes on improving your LinkedIn profile. So if you go to
Ah,
b2bpowerhour.com and sign up for our field notes, you'll get that to
I
make
was
sure
wondering
that
why this came. Now I
it's
see.
true though, because I think about like if I'm doing cold email outreach, I want that person, if they're going to take any time to look at if the message is good enough before they respond, they're going to look me up.
Only, and so there's one caveat I'll throw to this
Okay.
because I've tested this. Only if you don't put your company name in. So
Interesting.
when I send cold outreach, just my first message, it's just my full name. Now, with search engine optimization, of course, LinkedIn has spent some healthy amount of money making sure that
Mhm.
they rank. Unless you post a lot on another social platform where your name keeps coming up more, or you have a really active blog, the first thing that usually comes up is LinkedIn. But you
Mhm.
also want to go and change your LinkedIn. You can change your URL so that it's customized and you can just have your name. Do that because that makes you more searchable. And then it
Mhm.
allows this level of intent that we're talking about right now to kick in. But when I rate my company, they go to the company page and then they might route in through a demo form or I can't see those things unless you
Mm.
have like 6 cents or demand
Mhm.
base or like a different intent. Just something to consider.
Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining this Friday. And I hope that this was useful and informative. I even learned things. I mean, that's how I know it was a good power hour. Nick, do you want to close this out?
This is actually a good reminder within your orgs to share.
Hmm.
I thought I had shared this with Morgan. We've done however many different accounts doing research and prospecting. I assumed that I had told him because we had did it together. Sharing best practices within your company is a really quick way to really drive things forward fast. Get everybody to go and do a quick screen grab of them manually prospecting and send it in once a week or once a month. And go and figure out why they're prospecting the way they are. There's some triggers, there's some new things to look for, set up different criteria, get smarter as a team. And it's 2022, Morgan.
Hmm.
If you guys need help, you're not stuck in your hidey holes. You're not alone. If you need help, shoot us a DM,
Yes.
jump in the comments. Anyone here I'm sure would support you as well. Sales is a team sport. Ask for help if you need it, and it doesn't require a purchase.
Yeah.
I wish you guys the best. Hope you have a great weekend to go and relax and enjoy life. And let's go kick some ass on Monday.
Sounds good. See you next week. Bye.